Jay Widener here, continuing our reading from Monument to the End of Time from the year 2000, written with the late, great Vincent Bridges. Today, we're going to talk, the section that we're on today is section 4 of chapter 5, and this is called the Hermetic Cathedrals. And so at long last, we arrive at the point where Fulcanelli began, the Gothic Cathedrals of Europe. In his 1926 masterpiece, The Mystery of the Cathedrals, Fulcanelli claimed that the Gothic cathedrals were hermetic libraries in stone, with the secret of alchemy displayed for all who could read it. When our investigation began, this seemed, in its own way, the most incredible of all Fulcanelli's claims. It was easier to believe that someone had stumbled privately onto the real secret behind the alchemical transformation than it was to believe that some secret society or societies had encoded this information deliberately into the design and the decorations of the greatest of all Christian monuments. For this to be true, several important preconditions would also have to be true, such as the existence of a secret or not so secret group with access to the highest levels of the church, bottomless wealth, connections with the Holy Land and the Muslim world, and knowledge of the inner core of alchemy. Before we as researchers could take Fulcanelli's claims seriously, we needed to validate the existence of such a group. The importance of that point is obvious. If Fulcanelli is merely pointing from his own unconscious, the meanings he gives certain images and motifs found in the cathedrals, rather than revealing an ancient alchemical tradition, then the mystery of the cathedrals is reduced to a work of symbolist fantasy. Interesting and useful to the psychologist, perhaps, but of limited value in terms of alchemy. Yet that is, if anything, Fulcanelli's main point. Mystery of the Cathedrals is not the usual alchemical cookbook or grimoire. Fulcanelli implies that he's revealing the mystery of alchemy as it was taught to him by reference to the hermetic meanings embodied within the cathedrals. It is therefore a demonstration not just of the alchemical philosophy, but of how this philosophy animated a lost medieval golden age. The key to understanding Fulcanelli's importance, and not just the value of his work, lies in the reality of this lost knowledge and the fact of its emergence as symbols on the walls of these imposing Christian structures. We begin our search with the origin of alchemy and discover that alchemy, while containing the knowledge of pre-catastrophe civilization, appeared in its modern form as part of the Gnostic ferment of the 1st century CE. This Gnostic worldview, derived from the mystery cults of the rapidly collapsing ancient world, supplied a theological and mythological framework for the emerging wave of monotheistic mysticism, such as Christianity and Essene Judaism. This framework also contained the essential ideas of alchemy's triple transformation, the specific magical technology of the triple transformation, inner yogic psychosexual disciplines, magical ceremonies combined with manipulation of sacred metals, and the secret of time and timing, including the begin and end of time, developed first within the Gnostic cults, including Christianity, and then dispersed into the intellectual underground of the Dark Ages. As part of the Gnostic paradigm, alchemy was influenced by Gnostic eschatological teachings, such as the path of return by the small lights to the one light. 2/3 of the transmutational secret was persecuted out of Orthodox and imperial Christianity, while the remaining third of the secret, that of time itself, was co-opted by its temporal leaders, such as Constantine, Charlemagne, and Otto I. For the Christians, the whole idea of the end of time became confused with the fall of the Roman state, and the apocalypse against heretics became an institution of the church. But the idea of a transformed reality, the Chileist vision of a new heaven and a new earth purged of sin, refused to die out. The concept of a spiritually animated matter became the keystone of the alchemical process. The illuminated Hebrew mystics of the Bahir recorded the techniques of animating matter and related them directly to the transformational process of galactic alignment. The Shiites, the Fatimids, and the Ismailis alike believed that Muhammad had received this information and passed on the secret of time and the coming day of judgment through the family of Ali. the Sufis of all persuasions retained the most complete understanding of the internal psychosexual transformation. We found that by the 10th century, alchemical knowledge had fragmented to the point that the secret had effectively been lost. The Byzantine Greek compilations of that era are composed of older material, much of it from the 1st century, such as the Isis the Prophetess story. The Islamic current had likewise split into the compilers and philosophers versus the mystical and the political. Among the Jews of the dispersion, knowledge of the Bahir was limited to several small family groups in Spain and Palestine. The information was on the verge of being lost, and it was hard to see how in a few short centuries it could have been revived and then became influential enough to appear on the cathedral walls, but it had. Working backward from the cathedrals themselves, we find that there was indeed enough mysteries to drive a small army of secret societies through. Quote, why did Western Europe build so many churches in the 300 years after the year 1000? What need was there in Europe, with hardly a fifth of its present population, for temples so vast that they are now rarely filled even on the holiest days? How could an agricultural civilization afford to build such costly edifices with a wealthy industrialization, which a wealthy industrialization can barely maintain, unquote? These questions were asked by no less an authority than Will Durant in his chapter in Volume 4 of the History of Civilization on the development of the Gothic cathedrals. And who designed them? Who decided on the artwork laid out on the ground plan, supervised the construction and the decoration? These are mostly unanswered and now unanswerable questions. We know the names of those master masons, but their history and the story of their work has for the most part been lost. But the fact of that work, its skill and symbolic integrity, points to the sophisticated degree of organization, perhaps on an international level, required to produce such elaborate and long-term projects. Buildings of such complexity and elegance do not happen by accident. As Durant noted, the year 1000 was a significant one to Western Christendom. As we began to investigate this significance, we came face to face with one of the seminal figures in the transition from the Dark Age to the medieval world, Pope Sylvester II. As we saw above, the Hermetic Pope proved to be the fulcrum in a complex series of events that resulted in effects as wide-ranging as the Crusades, the Templars, the Peace of God movement, and its heretical offshoots, the Grail romances, and eventually the cathedral building movement itself. As we followed the tangled pattern of Sylvester's career, we found the seeds of our sophisticated international organization in the various chronicling orders established by Sylvester within and on the edges of the other monastic orders, the Benedictines, the Cluniacs, and the Cistercians. I was having trouble with that one. This fluidity of organization gained a central focus with the establishment of the group of chroniclers at Jerusalem in 1002. From that point on, we can safely speak of an order of Sion in Jerusalem with connections among all three major monastic orders back in Europe. During the 11th century, all of these monastic orders began to build in the pre-Gothic style known as Romanesque. Within these monastic communities, groups of specialists developed. They were monks and scholars who knew Greek and mathematics, especially geometry, and were also skilled in building. As these schools grew, they were influenced by architecture from many distant places: the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and the Mosque of the Tulun in Cairo. It was not hard to see the Order of Sion with its Byzantine and Fatimid connections as a source of that influence. After the First Crusade conquered Jerusalem, the Order of Sion became in various ways the rock upon which the Kingdom of Jerusalem was founded. The order used its connections back in Europe to capitalize on the discovery around 1102 of the alchemical and cosmological secrets. A decade later, wealth began flowing back to Europe, mostly to the Cistercians, a formerly bankrupt splinter group of Cluniac monks led by the future Saint Bernard. By 1130, the Templars had been established. St. Bernard was the foremost Christian of his day, and Europe was poised on the edge of the cathedral building mania. Gothic was in the air, but had not yet been given form. For that, we have to thank St. Denis and the Abbot Suger. So that's the end. So one of the things that has to be pointed out is that Europe warmed up considerably in the year 1000. And from 1000 to about 1340, Europe was very, very warm. And grapes could grow all the way up into northern England. It was so warm. And this is when the Vikings began exploring United States. Well, it wasn't, America, the land of that became later known as America, and conquered Greenland and Iceland because it was finally warm enough for them to take their boats out. And this is also when the cathedral building began. And the average work day, our work week for the average person in Europe was probably only about 15 or 20 hours for those not working on the cathedrals, because it was so warm that food was just growing everywhere. The population was swelling, and that the weather did give rise to the building of the cathedrals, which of course abruptly ends. And right when the mini ice age comes in the mid 1300s, that's when all cathedral building comes to pretty much a halt, and really just meagerly gets started after the ice ages, and kind of the whole movement gives out. But so what were they trying to accomplish? Well, the Templars were the people behind the building of the cathedrals, and I do believe they were. I think what they were trying to do is a kind of a secret war against the Catholic Church. In other words, the Catholic Church outlawed reading and writing and mathematics, and the monks and the priests could read and write and do that, but everybody else could not. And by building a cathedral in a town, you immediately have to teach people how to communicate, because your organization is going to have to be huge. And so people have to communicate, therefore they have to read and write. People have to know mathematics, because you can't build unless you know your geometry. It's incredibly difficult to build a building without a lot of knowledge. And a building like a cathedral, it would take an immense amount of knowledge to build a cathedral. So, and then the other thing, of course, is that we have no plans. There's no blueprints anywhere. There's no models. A complex building like a cathedral would definitely have to have a model built of it. And so there's just a lot of mystery about who financed it, where did the money come from. But what it did was one of the alchemical actions that these cathedrals did, as we know from mosques in the Middle East or the temples in India, is that they draw down the ether. The towers draw down the ether down to the floor, and then the people walk around in the labyrinths in circles, absorbing the etheric energy. And then the cathedrals were always built on the highest hill, if they could do it, of every town in Europe. And so the etheric energy would come down the hill and down into the town. And it was designed to create a spiritual vortex in Europe, which was completely void of that before that, except for some of the Celtic structures in Europe, in England and Ireland. Pretty much Europe was void of these things, and the Templars brought it back. They also built the cathedrals on the places of pagan holy sites. So Notre Dame was built on an Isis. There's an island that's shaped like a boat. That's the island that Notre Dame sits on in the Seine River. And it was a temple to Isis before it before the Catholics and the Christians came. And so the Templars were very smart. They built their cathedrals right in the holy places of the pagans, so that the townspeople would even be more enthusiastic about the building. And then the buildings became the centerpiece of the entire town. Weddings and concerts and theater and everything would take place in the cathedral. Napoleon was ordained or made the emperor at Notre Dame, in fact. So anyway, cathedrals and their history and the mystery behind cathedrals is really fascinating. And I'm going to get into, after each show, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how the way that the cathedral is built and the cross structure and the dome is all designed to imbue the building with this incredible energy. And that energy, it's interesting because the energy first comes in through the ceiling, and you need to have a wooden ceiling. And so when Notre Dame burned down, or the ceiling burned down, effectively short-circuited Notre Dame forever. And when they put the metal roof on Chartres Cathedral, they essentially disconnected it from the etheric energy coming in. So it's a tragedy in a lot of ways. So anyway, that's it. I'm Jay Widener. We've been reading from A Monument to the End of Time, Alchemy, Fulcanelli, and the Great Cross. And hit like and subscribe and tell your friends. And I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. This is Jay Widener, Reality Check, and we're starting a membership plan for content that we don't normally want to put up on some of these platforms, and I want you to join. We're not going to stop doing the regular shows. We're just adding content. Be a lot more one-on-one stuff with me, and I think you guys will find it really interesting. So we'll put it up here below how you can get into the membership plan, and please join. I'm Jay Widener, and thanks for watching.